settle in, and let the room grow quiet. This will be a calm walk through the past at the pace of lamplight. Nothing urgent waits for us. If sleep comes, the story will keep its gentle path and welcome you wherever you return. Tonight we follow small, human things, harbors at dusk, old roads, gardens, kitchens, libraries, ledgers. When tradition speaks, I'll say tradition remembers. When records are clear, I'll say records suggest, and we drift on. The first part. Night gathers slowly on a small quay. A single lamp hangs from an iron hook and makes a soft oval on the water. Ropes darken. A mild wind comes off the strait and straightens a pennant once, then lets it fall. The keeper of the harbour tests the wick with a practiced touch and looks outward, not to search for anything urgent, only to confirm that the sea is keeping its unhurried breath. If you stand here, you can feel how the world quiets itself by degrees. All stop, voices fold, the tide carries a faint whisper along the stones. The sea's our road into the story. Far from this gentle quay, far in time, further than in miles, a philosopher wrote about a great island beyond a narrow gateway. Tradition remembers him as Plato, writing in his later years. He set his tale in the mouth of a traveling elder who had heard it from Egyptian priests in a temple of memory. The details drift like islands in mist, a ringed city, shining walls, canals like ribbons, a people whose pride grew larger than their calendar. Records suggest he placed that glory in a distant age, and then used it as a mirror for his own. Tonight we do not argue with him, we walk alongside. At lamplight pace, imagine the narrow gate he named, to facing cliffs framing a channel that joins a calmer sea to a great outer plane of water. Sailors called those cliffs a pair of pillars. They were a habit of speech more than a precise line. The habit helps us. It gives us a small doorway to pass through in our minds. From the inner stories we know to the wider, salt dark field where islands rise and vanish in haze. A clerk sits near our lamp and copies a few lines into a neat hand. He's our night archivist. The sheet he fills is not dramatic. It notes a fairy due at first light, salted fish for the market, to jars of oil for a shrine, and a visitor who asks after old books. He does not know it, but the words he sets down are the kind that endure. The grander speeches wear out the schedule of a harbour keeps breathing because people need it tomorrow. The lamp, the ledger, the low tide together, they fold the day away. Now the water widens. Beyond the pillars the swell is longer, and the sky seems taller. In this outer space, stories travel differently. Some are carried in the mouths of pilots and merchants, some in the thin script of a scholar, some in the copper squeak of a shipwright's plane. A craftsman works late under a shed. He drags a block plane, a longer length of cedar, and listens to the even curl of shavings. The wood will become a plank where two curves meet, a quiet seam in a hull that will keep sleep in a cabin and rain out of a cargo. He smiles at the neatness. Pieces that fit, float. That is all the magic he trusts. We let the myth itself stand at a distance, like a headland at dusk. Tradition remembers an island of order and wealth, the rings of a capital like ripples after a thrown stone, fields counted with care, harbours where ships from any wines found purchase. It remembers pride that thickened, storms that grew near, a night and a day when water took more than it gave. Records suggest the oldest parts of that world faced real sea and real fire. In calm words we can say this: islands sit on restless ground, coasts change, ash travels farther than a ship in a week. A wind reaches us from another season. It smells faintly of resin and pumice, the way some islands do, or an old rain has drawn scents from stone. Somewhere to the south and east, past capes and causeways, there is a caldera that remembers a different century. The people who lived within sight of it once farmed terraces and set jars to catch ash-free water. They painted with mineral colors that still seem wet when you see them by museum light. They woke to a day when the horizon became a column and the sea withdrew in confusion. If we speak of them tonight, we place the words gently. Daily life has its own courage. Evacuations are made one hand on another, one boat tied to one ring, backed by the lamp. The archivist turns a page. He writes a note to himself to ask the visitor in the morning what exactly he seeks: a description of a ringed city, a map of courses on a dark sea, a prayer with a date. He smiles at the thought that each might be the same thing in a different coat. Maps are prayers that hope for safe turns. Prayers are maps for a heart that wants a calm path through a crowded day. A city with its rings is simply a map of order laid in stone, a promise that movement can happen without harm. The keeper walks the key once more and knocks a knuckle against a bollard by habit. The sound is soft and reassuring. He looks to the lamp and sees that the glass has stayed clear. He adjusts nothing. Ships at anchor show one or two quiet lights. The tide lifts and lets go. Beyond the doorway of the strait, the open water feels like the pause between slow breaths. In that wide field of night, a name like Atlantis begins to feel less like an argument and more like a place to rest, a word for an old human wish, to build something measured and kind, to keep pride from outrunning the weather, to make canals that carry water and not anger. If you like, trace the rings in your mind as if you were drawing them on fine sand. A center with a spring, a circle of water, a circle of land, another of water, another of land, a causeway like a patient stitch. Now add gardens in the quiet spaces, and low bridges that let boats pass without fuss, and storehouses where grain waits without complaint. Under it all, a habit of checking the lamp and the ledger, so that mornings do not surprise anyone who is tired. The archivist closes his book and sets it where the lamp will not scorch it. He will sleep near the door that faces the water. The craftsman stacks his cedar and dampens the last small ember, so the shop does not wake by itself. The keeper ties the lamp against the wind that might rise before dawn and walks the short path to his room. In the dark beyond the pillars, the larger sea turns like a slow wheel. Our story turns with it, steady, quiet, content to follow the curve. The second part. A quiet room holds a book that does not breathe. The pages are pale and patient. A window stands open to a city that has finished talking for the day. Inside, a reader settles into the kind of stillness that lets words grow wider than the margins. The names that come forward are old, yet they arrive with the softness of conversation. Socrates, Critias, Timaeus. In these dialogues, a city is praised, a world is arranged, and a story is offered like a bowl of water held out to a guest. Tradition remembers that Plato put the tale of Atlantis into linked pieces. In the first, a festival day in Athens, friends gather and agree to praise a just city and a just order. In the second, the promise of a longer story, a far-off island power, ringed and rich, set against an old Athens that stands on plain ground and steady habits. The framing is gentle and deliberate. He wants the listener to rest inside a pattern before the sea appears. We follow that pace. We let the words find a slight tide. Critias, the speaker inside the story, tells how a traveler once brought a memory from Egypt temples that keep long accounts. He speaks of priests who keep registers like tree rings. They do not hurry. When the talk turns to disasters, fire and flood, they nod the way old mariners nod. Coasts change, people forget, and then remember again in new words. The point is not the thunder, it is the return to order. The island in his telling is large, the rings meticulous, the canal straight and calm. The people there admire skill, measure, and beauty, then test themselves against their own pride. The sea keeps its one opinion. It asks everything to keep time. Records suggest something simple and useful. Outside of Plato, the full tale is not seen. Fragments and parallels exist: old islands, old floods, old harbors, but the exact ringed capital lives on those pages best. Hearing this does not break the spell, it sets the terms. We can walk with the story as with a map drawn to make a point about cities and seasons, habit and hubris without asking it to be a census. In the dark, a parable is a kind harbor. It lets the mind rest among shapes. Picture a copyist's bench in a quiet portico. Lamps breathe evenly along a colonnade. A young scribe reads a line twice and shapes the letters slowly, as if he were laying tiny stones for a path. He pauses to imagine what a ringed city would sound like at night. Water moving in narrow channels under small bridges, A cart wheel taking its careful turn across a causeway. Voices falling into sleep on a steady timetable. He smiles at the thought that order has a sound, low, regular, kind to tired people. Now turn, and imagine says by a river in Egypt. The temple weathered and generous. Priests sit with tablets in their laps and talk about cycles, the way farmers talk about rain. They do not hurry over the long spans. They tap the clay when a number is too sharp for a sleepy ear, and say instead, very long ago. They tell us cities that rose with confidence and fell with noise, and of other towns that rose with less noise and kept their shape by watching the water and writing things down. The listener nods. The night holds the story like a net holds a school of small fish, loosely, gently, enough. Back on our quay, the harbour lamp keeps its soft oval. The archivist has brought out a different notebook and is copying a list of island names, some known, some only guessed at. He does not chase them. He writes them in a wide hand, with space around each, and lets the page feel like a sea. He adds a note to himself in the margin. How much of a place is sure, and how much is a habit carried elsewhere? Then he closes the book, because the question can sleep. Most good questions can. We stay with the tone of the dialogues measured, courteous, unhurried. In Timaeus, a world is sketched with calm lines, elements, motions, the usefulness of proportional things. In Critias, a city wears its order like a well-fitted garment. The island opponent is drawn not as a monster, but as a mirror wealth and skill turned outward until they forget the quiet work that made them possible. A gentle warning lives here, the kind that works by rhythm rather than alarm. The listener hears it the way one hears a bell from a far temple, clear, not loud. Tradition remembers that the story breaks off. The long speech promised for the end never arrives on the page. We can accept that as we accept rain that stops before the jar is full. The rest of the water will come by other paths. Other writers will imagine the finish. Sailors will point to this reef or that caldera. Gardeners will lay circular beds and smile at the thought that a city can be a garden if you keep the paths clear. All of this is a good way to rest with an old tale, by letting it lend patterns to the hands that still work. A craftsman in cedar runs a finger along a curve meant for a boat's flank and feels when the grain agrees. He does not need a ringed city to understand order. He needs a curve that meets a curve without complaint. A reader in Athens closes the scroll and looks out at a square that will be swept in the morning. He has been told a story about measure and pride, and perhaps he will remember to lift his feet when the street is being watered. The archivist at the quays sets a clean page for dawn and writes one word at the top: arrivals. If you are drifting, you may carry one image forward, a plan drawn on sand with a stick circles with water between, a causeway, small boats that know their turn, gardens in the quiet arcs. A hand smooths the lines with the palm. The shore takes them back. The lamp keeps shining. The sea remembers the shapes without needing to keep them. That is one way stories live, not by holding everything, but by teaching a pace. We finish this chapter as the reader in the portico closes the book with care and puts it where the night air will not warp it. He thinks of a city that slept without fear, because the canals were clear and the ledgers honest. He thinks of another that forgot that simple happiness and leaned too hard on its own name. He ties the scroll and smiles at the rightness of a knot well made. The lamp, the ledger, the low tide once again they fold the day away. The third part. The islands lie like stepping stones in a mild sea. At first light a calm swell rolls into a circular bay and lifts small boats as if they were thoughts made of wood. Houses stand close together above the quay, their walls the colour of warm sand, their doors open to let night air out and morning air in. A woman sweeps a threshold with an easy rhythm. She looks toward the water to guess the hour by its colour, then sets a jar upright to catch the brightness of the day. Farther along the shore, a painter sits on a low stool and grinds a pinch of mineral blue. He has been working on a wall where small ships travel through bands of colour. Sea, headland, sea again. He paints people if they were part of weather curves and calm gestures, more interested in movement than in names. The harbour he imagines is ringed by land, with narrow channels and gentle bridges. He has never seen the word Atlantis. He has seen many codes that teach the same lesson. If you arrange paths and water well, mornings are kind. The market awakes without noise. Rope is coiled, fish are lifted from wicker baskets, a roll of linen shows its quiet sheen in shade. A bowtrite runs his hand along a new plank and listens to the small whisper of cedar under his palm. He thinks about seams and tar, about a bow that will neither bite the chop to hard nor ride to high. He ties a knot and nudges a wedge with his foot to seat a rib. There is pride in the neatness, but it does not hurry him. Tradition remembers that islands like these traded more than goods. They traded ways of doing things. How to set a jar in a corner so the cool air can circle it. How to carry a torch inside a clay shade so wind will not bully it. How to mark a keystone so a rope sits and doesn't wander. Records suggest that ash once fell here softly and then not softly at all. Before that day, people drew dolphins with joy and ships with care. After that day, some drawings waited in darkness for a very long time. A lane climbs from the harbour through a neighbourhood of small courtyards. A potter's yard smells of damp clay and warm dust. He presses a seal into a wet handle, not a letter, just a shape that says, "This came from these hands." On a shelf, shallow bowls dry to a quieter colour. In a corner, a wide jar stands ready for grain, and a smaller jar for oil. The potter pauses to watch light move across the curve of the wide jar. He likes how even light becomes a thin line when it meets a clean edge. On the quay, the archivist opens his notebook and writes down arrivals that have no need to impress anyone. A ferry from the next island with 3 coils of rope and a basket of figs, a boat from the headland with 2 goats, and a rolled sail to mend a visitor who asks if anyone here has seen a plan of a ringed harbour. He adds a small note to himself. Ask the painter about his ships. He smiles. Sometimes art keeps a kind of record when ledgers sleep. We move out along the bay. Low islands sit like the rim of a wide bowl. In the center, there is a feeling of depth. The water is a darker blue there, almost purple when the sky leans into evening. A fisherman knows by the shape of the ripple where the bottom falls away. He lets his net slip and counts quietly, not to measure time, but to make his hands patient. When he draws the net back, he thanks the sea in a way that is more habit than speech. Tradition remembers a day when the horizon stood up. Records suggest that before such days, there are warnings, a low, long murmur underfoot, a tide that draws to far, a light ash that dusts the lip of a jar. We say this gently because our night is for rest. We keep to small acts, a woman lifting a child, a boat untied with a steady hand, a lamp shielded in a clay shade. Daily life is how people meet large things and still find sleep. Back by the painter's wall, blue deepens. He sets down the brush to let the plaster take the color without hurry. He steps back and looks at the ships he has made. They move in a comfortingly orderly sea, past headlands that rhyme with one another. He knows the sea can be otherwise. His order on the wall is not denial. It is a wish for mornings to keep their promises. Wishes can be useful if they remind hands what to do. The harbour lamp, our small spine finds its echo here, or a clay lantern on a post. It makes a mild circle on pale stone where feet will pass at dawn. A boy sits near it and winds a length of cord around a block of wood, learning the muscle memory of tidy coils. The cord lies flat and obedient. He looks pleased. Order that can be held in the hands is the kind that endures. The fourth part. The strait wakes before the cities do. Between 2 long headlands, the sea keeps to thoughts at once. A slow surface river moving inward toward the inland sea, and a deeper, quieter drift going out. Small boats wait in the lee of a rock until the balance feels kind. A pilot kneels at the bow with a coil in his lap. He pays out a lead line and listens with his hand. When the weight kisses the bottom, he rubs the tallow in its hollow and lifts it to the light. Sand, shell, a pinch of weed, each tells him where he is without needing a map. On a calm morning, the channel seems broad and courteous. The cliffs across look near enough to carry a whispered greeting. Sailors teach each other the gait in simple words. When the moon stands here, and the wind is kind, go with the surface stream. When the moon lies there, and wind is stubborn, wait or hug the shadow of the southern shore. They point to carved marks on a headland, and the way foam leans along a ledge. They name the paired headlands as pillars, not to make them magical, but to remember that doors should be treated with care. Farther west, where the outer coast turns to long dunes and salt marsh, a harbour keeps its habits. Low warehouses breathe cool air. The smell is a quiet braid of brine, cedar, and the faint tang of a dye pot that has dozed all night. A clerk, the same patient kind we have been following, sits by the doorway with a wax tablet. He notes arrivals that do not mind being plain. A coastal run with salted fish, a broad-beamed trader with jars of oil and rope, a long, lean vessel bringing lumps of pale metal from a far estuary. He writes the wind as if it were a person, friendly, distracted. Late in the day, a craftsman at the edge of the quay twists 3 small cords into one and watches them take a single lay. Rope remembers hands. He passes the new length to a pilot who tests it by feel, then ties a bowl in as neat as a signature. Across the water, the opposite headland stays still near the surface. The world moves. The pilot smiles at the old lesson. You can pass a narrow place if you read it slowly. Tradition remembers that coasts beyond the pillars spoke to each other by low, regular boats, by harbours tucked under dunes, by beacons that burned driftwood salt blue. They traded tools, salt, skins, resins, and sometimes a stone the colour of dawn. They moved ideas the same way they moved cargo, carefully, on whether they could trust. Records suggest that soundings, leads, lines, tallow were a common language long before charts were common possessions. A bit of shell on tallow has the courtesy of proof. The pilot points out 3 things to an apprentice: the way the ripples tilt where the shallow shelf ends, the handful of cloud that tends to sit above a wet shoal, and the taste of the air when the outer swell pushes in under the surface stream. The apprentice nods and nods again, then repeats the knot in his lap until he can tie it without looking. He does not hurry. He will carry the gate in his hands. At the end of the quay, a small shrine keeps a streak of soot above its lamp bracket. A woman places a spoon of oil in a dish and touches a flame to a wick. It lifts, then holds steady. She looks toward the strait the way people look toward a road, not to whirring at it, but to think kindly of those who must use it today. Behind her, a boat builder smooths a plank with strokes, so even that a gull falls asleep on a post nearby. Routine is the harbour's prayer. If you want to picture the gate while drifting toward sleep, keep it simple. To long shoulders of land reaching toward each other. Between them, a lane with to courtesy rules. What goes in should not rush, what goes out should not be proud. The inward stream wears a lighter face and tells small boats to let themselves be carried. The outward path hides under it and works in slower patience. When the moon invites, pass. When it frowns, wait. Tradition remembers that a great island lay somewhere beyond, orderly and ringed. The memory makes sense here, because the sea already teaches rings, eddies behind rocks, round wells of calm in harbours, circles of light from lamps over still water. Records suggest no senses for the island itself, but they give us steady things: the strait, the winds, the boats, the rope, the dye, the metal, the way pilots talk with their hands. It is enough for a night story. It lets the mind lie down where the world is measured and kind. Our archivist copies a small list onto a clean sheet. Names of headlands, each with a gentle note: white cliffs, loud birds, sweet water near the second cove, mud that stains the tallow red. He leaves space between the names, as though leaving safe water between islands. In the margin, he writes a thought. Some places live on a coast, others live in a way of doing things. He underlines nothing. The lamp and the page agree that this can be true without being sharp. Toward evening, the surface stream leans inward again. The deep drift answers with its slow reply. The pilot coils the line, touches the tallow with his thumb, if it were a seal on a letter, and sets it away. Boats that waited in the morning are now ready to pass in the evening. The craftsman hangs new rope in a cool place where the salts will not wake it too much. The woman pinches the shrine's flame a little lower, so the wind will not tease it after dark. The harbour circle of light grows more visible as the sky turns the colour of wet slate. If you are floating between listening and sleep, you can let the gates become a door in your own house. There is a lamp on one side and a quiet room on the other. Between them, a short hall where the air changes temperature in a kindly way. You pass without hurry. You do not turn on any harsh lights. You keep the rules of the house you already know. Outside, the sea keeps its two thoughts. Inside, the page keeps one. The fifth part. Night gathers over a long table where parchment lies like a small, pale sea. A compass rests at its center, not the needle kind, but the kind that draws circles. Its two legs leave tender pricks where islands will be. A map maker warms his hands over a cup of water that has gone quiet. He lifts a straight edge and draws the first of many light lines that will cross the sheet like gentle winds. He works slowly, because slowness makes the shore truer than style does. Outside, the city has lowered its voice. Inside, the pen lifts and settles with the patience of tide. This is a different harbor, a later century. Ships have learned to trust a small, floating needle that points with a steady mood. Sailors call it the compass. It is a soft opinion that helps when clouds make the sky forgetful. The map maker listens to their talk, headland to headland, lantern to lantern, counting hours between beacons, tasting water where rivers meet the sea. He does not paint kings, he writes coasts. The names he inks are like stitches along an edge. They hold the cloth. In a quiet monastery not far inland, our night archivist sits by a narrow window and copies a traveler's book. The script is slow and round. He draws a simple ship in the margin, a reminder to himself that this passage concerns islands beyond a familiar gate. He does not argue with any of it. He makes it legible. The lamplight steals a little color from the page and gives it back as warmth. A bell sounds far away and does not disturb him. He pauses just long enough to wet the pen. Tradition remembers that in the Middle Ages, maps told many kinds of truth at once. A mapper Monday might set a garden at the world's center, line a river with stories, and let distant coasts curl like petals. A porthole and chart would do the opposite. It would favor utility windrows, straight courses, harbors named like beads on a string. One map taught prayer and picture, the other taught arrival. Both are kinds of courtesy to the traveler, one to the heart, one to the hands. Our map maker belongs to the second kind. He pricks the parchment where pilots have sworn a harbor sits, then draws its name sideways along the shore so a captain can read it from the sea. He spreads the compass legs and draws a circle faintly, then sets the edge and pulls a line that leans across the water. He knows the line will not be sailed exactly. It exists to calm the mind and organize the day. The sea prefers curves, the page prefers straight intentions. He has heard the island story, to the one about rings and canals, and a city that forgot how to be modest. He lets it sit at the edge of his thoughts the way a headland sits at the edge of the eye, useful for bearing, not for argument. If a sailor asks him where that city lies, he will point gently to habits instead of coordinates. Clear channels, kind bridges, storehouses that breathe, ledgers that do not lie. If you build those, he might say softly, you have what the story meant to praise. In the scriptorium, the archivist turns to a page where a pilgrim describes an ocean road with stepping stone islands, places where water is sweet, where a spring hides under a fig, where a beach faces the right wind for running down the coast. He copies the list without crowding it. Each name gets space to float. In the margin, he draws a tiny lantern and writes beside it, lamp at the key, return here when lost. The lamp has become a spine we can find in any chapter. Far down the coast, a harbor keeper trims the wick of his lamp with a clean thumbnail and watches the circle of light settle on the water. A carpenter repairs the lid of a chest that will hold charts, wrapping its rim in thin leather so it will not bruise the pages. He works with the silence of someone who knows he is mending a memory rather than making a show. He tests the hinge and nods. This will open softly, he says, to no one in particular. Records suggest that these charts, the ones with roses and straight lines, grew from practice more than from theory. Captains compared notes, pilots argued kindly in winter rooms, and over time a common face of the coast emerged. steady enough to steer by. The charts did not need to know every inland city. They needed only to agree where water met land and where a lantern could be trusted. In that way, they were like good stories. They left room for sleep and still brought you home. The mapmaker lifts his head when a courier arrives with a damp roll of news from a southern port. He unknots the thong, flattens the page, and smiles at a familiar hand. The letter says that a shoal has shifted to boat lengths east, and that a spring near a cove now tastes of salt in late summer. The mapmaker adds two careful dots and a note in smaller script. He does not erase the old line, he lays a better one beside it. Correction is a kind of kindness when done without pride. If you want to see the world as he sees it sleepily, kindly picture a page that is more sea than land. The coasts are pale, the water is the color of calm. Across the water a rose blooms with many points, and from it lines radiate like quiet rays. They do not hurry you, they suggest a way. Names lean along the shore like shells laid in order. At the corner of the page sits a lamp in miniature, a reminder that the page itself is a harbor at night. Tradition remembers that some later readers unfolded these maps and imagined, again, a larger island far off, perhaps beyond the known winds. The story traveled in the margins on the lips of sailors, in the corners of books, in rooms where people who loved order and boats and weather liked to talk. Records suggest that as charts improved, the ringed city did not arrive on them. That absence is quiet and useful. It tells us that the story belongs to the part of the mind that arranges gardens and does not claim to measure oceans. The archivist closes his book for the night and sets a small weight on the page so it will not curl. The mapmaker sands a name lightly and breathes away the extra dust. The harbour keeper lifts the lamp and shields it with his hand as he crosses a darker patch of quay. Each does one small thing that helps the next morning start clean. A chart cannot promise fair weather. It can promise that the first decision of the day has already been made gently. If you are drifting, you can rest on a single thought. The page is a harbour. It holds its lamp in one corner and leaves the rest for water to breathe. You can leave your eyes on that lamp and let the names blur into a soft line. When you wake, you will still know where the edge is and where the way lies. That is all a map needs to do at night. The sixth part. Across centuries, the shape returns in other hands. A city rises on level ground beside a broad river, and its first gesture is a circle. Builders walk the arc with ropes and stakes until the curve closes on itself, like a ring set gently on a cloth. Walls will come later, for now there is measure 4 gates at the winds, a road that crosses a road, and gardens planned as if water and shade were parts of the alphabet. In the cool of morning, a surveyor lifts a cord and looks along it, as though it were a sentence that must read smoothly from end to end. In another climate, far to the east, a plain holds water like a mirror. Engineers cut straight, quiet channels that bring the lake close to the stones. A moat becomes a long breath around a sacred island. Bridges are low, their backs rise only a little, so a person can cross without a sharp step. On the causeway, 2 children carry baskets of lotus and laugh at something the water has remembered, and they have not. Concentric lines are gentle when they are made for walking, for shade, for the slow movement of boats that do not hurry anyone. Our archivist finds drawings of these places, circles and rectangles, nested like bowls copied in a careful hand. He notes that each plan listens to its ground. One city uses earth packed and smoothed, another uses stone that takes carving well, a third trusts brick that warms in sun and cools under night. He writes a quiet sentence. Ring is a habit, not a boast. Then he turns the page and draws a small lamp in the margin by a water gate. He is pleased by the thought that a plan can be kind. A gardener walks the innermost path at dawn with a shallow hoe and a bundle of cut reeds for edging. He trims a corner so the path holds its shape after rain. He shows an apprentice how to set a thin channel across a bed so water moves with dignity and does not run away. Nearby, a worker lifts a ceramic jar from a cool niche and tests its lid. The jar breathes just enough to keep what it holds from spoiling. Order is not a sermon here. It is a pale set where a hand can find it in the dark, Tradition remembers that round cities were praised for their symmetry and their welcome, that moated temples were admired for a reflecting sky and calming air. Records suggest they also did simple work. They slowed flood, they directed crowds, they made shade fall where people needed to stand. A timekeeper in a tower looked along a line to the horizon and nodded when the sun touched an expected mark. A bell sounded, even and low. Ours grew modest. The map maker of our last chapter would approve. He would see how the ring can be read from above as a teaching, and from within as a softened edge where traffic does not become harm. He would note how markets gather along a long curve, because voices carry well there, and how water gates align with streets, so barges can deliver grain and take away refuse without troubling the courtyards. He would draw these things small and tidy, with labels that lean. In a shaded room, a maker of water clocks sets a copper bowl in a basin and pricks a very small hole near the rim. He covers the hole with a fingertip, breathes once, and lets the water begin to speak in drops. Each fall is a soft agreement between height and time. He adjusts a wick in a lamp and watches the meniscus climb the inside of the bowl. When the bowl dips, a gentle bell will sound in the next room, and someone will look up from a ledger to see that the hour has arrived without need of a shout. A boat circles the inner moat at noon. Its wake touches the stone in a soft, repeating fan that makes the geometry visible to the eye. On the bank, a mason fits a curved coping piece against its neighbor and rubs the seam with a damp cloth. He leaves a line as thin as a hair. A child sets a leaf on the water and runs along the edge to see where the eddies will take it. The leaf chooses the long curve, and then the gate. All of this will be easy to remember at night. If you wish, you can rest with a single scene, a round plan seen as if through water, with 4 gates like compass points, and a broad ring that is more garden than defense. Shade trees stand at measured intervals. A combed canal moves under low bridges. In the center, not a throne, but a pool where the air is cool and the day's heat loses its edge. The lamp by the water gate keeps its patient circle of light. You could find your way by that circle alone. The archivist closes the folio and lays a strip of cloth between the leaves so the ink will not smudge. He writes 2 small words on the spine, rings, kind. Then he files it near maps and near garden books, because in his mind these things are neighbors. Our craftsman walks home along the inner curve with reed ends under his arm. He will cut them to length and edge tomorrow's beds. The timekeeper snuffs his lamp with a lid and smiles at the neatness of a day that did not need to raise its voice. The 7th part. Stone remembers water in quiet lines. Along a weathered coast, shelves of rock rise like steps, each one a soft mark where the sea once rested. A shepherd pauses on the path and runs a hand over a ledge polished by waves long gone. He doesn't call it anything grand. He just knows that the shore and the water take turns holding the edge. Down below, the morning tide nudges pebbles together until they fit like a handful of beans in a bowl. On a nearby beach, children collect pale, feather-light stones that float for a while before they sink. A potter picks one up, breaks it gently, and smiles at the tiny bubbles frozen inside. He will mix some into a lime wash to make a wall breathe better in heat. He will not hurry the drying. He has learned from the shore that patience leaves fewer cracks. Farther along, a quarry shows a different memory. A face of stone carries a faint ripple, as if a sheet had been folded there and pressed flat again. A mason waits the surface and watches the pattern darken. He chooses blocks where the lines are straight and calm. He sets them into a curve, the harbour mouth, so water will pass without offence, and boats will enter as if welcomed. Our archivist sorts a folder labelled simply water and ground. Inside are sketches of coasts before and after quiet changes, a cove widened by a season of soft storms, a spit lengthened by sand that walked itself along the shore, a low islet where birds nest now that the current has learned a new habit. He writes a sentence that could be read by anyone. The coast is a slow storyteller. A boatman mends a net in the lee of a dark rock. He knows a notch where the sound is different would hollows a touch as the swell passes under an unseen ledge. When friends ask how he finds the channel on fog mornings, he taps that rock and says, Listen to what the water says when it thinks. He means that some truths arrive by repetition other than announcement. Tradition remembers places where the sea went too far in a single breath, and then came back carrying things that didn't belong on streets. We let that live as a distant weather report, the kind you hear through a door. Records suggest that long before and long after such days, people moved stones, replanted reeds, scraped clean the mouth of a canal, and laid the next morning straight. The work is steady. The tools are honest: shovels, baskets, ropes, a list on a board. In a garden above the quay, a caretaker lifts a tile and clears a channel no wider than his thumb, so rain will walk the path it should. He tucks the tile back and smooths the joint with 2 fingers. Order is often no louder than that. A visitor asks him about old disasters. He points to a willow's roots binding the bank and says, "We plant, we mark, we remember." Then he hangs a small wind bell that will tell him if the breeze has turned. At low tide, the harbour keeper walks the line where seaweed dries to velvet. He marks a post with a new notch and writes the day's quiet fact. The bar at the mouth shows to hand widths more than last spring. He adds a second note for the mapmaker. A fresh trickle at the north wall tastes very slightly of salt. The notes are not dramatic. They prevent surprises. If you wish to rest with one image, hold this: a shore drawn with patient lines, a step, another step, each a soft memory of water's pause, a child pocketing a light stone and later handing it to a potter, a mason laying a curve that greets the tide, the lamp at the quay keeping its circle on the water, unchanged by tall terms, content with its small task. The archivist ties his folder with a plain cord and stands it beside ledgers that smell faintly of cedar. The boatman hangs his net where the breeze will comb it dry. The gardener wipes his hands on a reed mat and listens to the new bell. Evening comes in a long, even breath. The sea keeps telling its story at the same unhurried pace, and the shore keeps taking notes you can read with your hands. The 8th part. Evening collects in rooms where pages breathe like quiet cloth. A scribe sharpens a quill with 2 calm strokes and touches it to a drop of dark. His desk is set near a narrow window. The last of the day makes the parchment a warm, even field. He copies a line, pauses, and smooths a curl with his fingernail, so the letter will lie down and sleep. Across the hall, another hand adds a small red mark where a new thought begins. The house is not noisy with learning, it is steady with it. Far to the south and east, a different courtyard holds the same patience. Under an arcade, a reader recites soft Greek into soft Arabic, while a partner follows in ink, finding quiet equivalents, like stones, that fit the same wall. Words become bridges. A breeze turns a palm leaf with the sound of a page. The lamp that hangs from the arch takes the old role we know. It keeps a small circle where attention is easy. Between these rooms runs the oldest road, sea lanes and mule paths, inns that remember travellers' names, and chests that carry pages wrapped in leather as if they were fruit that should not bruise. A book merchant ties 3 volumes together with a strip of dyed wool and writes on a tag what the pages argue, but where they came from and where they must arrive. In the harbour, a boat takes on water and stores as if it were preparing to carry a sleeping child. The crew know how to stack chests, so the swell speaks to them gently. Tradition remembers that in later centuries, people who loved careful talk, commentators, compilers, translators, kept the older voices near. Records suggest the route was never a straight line. A page went quiet in one place and woke in another. A margin note grew into a chapter travelled alone, a lost leaf reappeared in a different hand. The work was not dramatic. It was lamplight, ink, and the discipline of copying without hurry. Our archivist opens a thin volume whose first surface bears a faint, scraped memory, a palimpsest. Under the new text, there is an older ghost that only appears when the light leans just so. He tilts the page, breathes once, and notes without alarm that the world sometimes writes itself twice on the same skin. He adds a slip of paper with a gentle summary for the next reader, and tucks a drawing of a lamp in the corner to say, "This is the spot where the eye may need kindness." A courier arrives after dusk with a leather satchel and tea on his breath. He lays out a clean cloth and unties knots in an order he could follow in the dark. From inside he lifts a small bundle of pages with sand still caught in the fold. He does not wipe the sand away. He lets it say that the book has recently known a coast. The scribe smiles and sets the bundle to relax near a bowl of water so it won't curl as it warms to the room. In a city to the west, a copyist in a cathedral school leans close to a borrowed text, copying the shape of names with the respect one gives to places one has not yet seen. Beside him, a simple diagram of circles just rings and lines reminds him to keep the sentence balanced. He's not chasing an island, he's learning a way to lay thought on a page so it can be walked without stumbling. When the bell sounds, he covers the work with linen and goes to eat in a room where voices are low. Along the quay, night has taken its place. The harbour lamp makes its oval on the water, and a small ship shows to steady windows in reply. The keeper listens for any wind that means mischief and hears none. He writes in his neat hand, arrivals 1 packet of philosophy, sliced like a loaf for students' departures, to copies for a friend who asks carefully and returns what he borrows. He smiles at the economy of the day. Knowledge moved. Nobody hurried. Everyone slept. If you like a single image to carry toward rest, let it be a table that has learned to hold both languages at once, one line above another, a soft bridge between, a lamp near the elbow, a strip of wool binding 3 books, a corner of the page where an old voice shows through just enough to be thanked. The world makes a circle of rooms and courtyards, and in each circle a hand continues a thought without turning it into a trumpet. The 9th part. Morning is pale over a quiet bay where the water lies like glass pressed with a cool hand. A small boat drifts above a pattern that the surface does not show low walls, a line of stones too regular for chance, a dark square that keeps its shadow even when the sun moves. 2 divers sit facing each other with their fins in their laps. One checks the knots on a thin line that pays out from a wooden reel, the other lays a fingertip on the glass of a depth board scored with soft marks. They speak little. The sea will tell them what it remembers if they move slowly. They slide in without a splash. The boatman watches the line run, then ties the free end to a cleat and sets a small bell where it will ring if the coil snags. The line is their sentence through the water: subject, verb, object, always bringing them back to the boat. Below, the divers pass over seagrass into a clear patch where stones have kept their angle for a very long time. A crab lifts itself like a clipped punctuation, then settles again. One diver brushes a corner. Silt rises, then folds itself down like dust finding a shelf. Far along the shore, a different team works among mounds of sand that sleep like small dunes against a low ridge. A conservator opens a shallow trench and lays felt along the edge so sun and breeze will handle the find like good hosts. A trowel moves in strokes that carry no drama, only measure. In a tray, sherds rest with their breaks facing each other, like quiet neighbors who may soon remember how to fit. A recorder, our archivist, with a hat writes gently, course of wool, direction of lay, fabric, pale with grit. He draws a lamp in the margin without thinking. Habit is comfort. Tradition remembers tales of harbors that sank or silted, of courtyards that slid and set, of quays that became reefs. Records suggest modest mechanisms, a river that thickened its mouth by our hands with each year, a long storm season that moved a bar, a change in wind that taught sand a new habit. The result, seen from above water, is an ordinary bay with pleasant light. Seen from the side, divers passing a line from hand to hand, it is a plan drawn in stones the color of bread. One diver steadies the line and floats a little above a rectangle. He holds a slate, draws for short strokes, then notes a number that is not sharp, only enough to tell the day from the next. He tucks a small lead weight into a corner to keep the silt from walking back too quickly. His partner lifts a fragment the size of a palm, a piece of ground that once saw footstep sand, slides it into a mesh bag that will not bruise it. Above, the boat's shadow slips a finger's breadth as the sun enjoys its late morning. On land, the conservator brushes along a threshold where two floors meet, one of packed earth, one of tiny stones set in a simple pattern like rain. She smiles when a dull curve appears, the arc of a doorway that made sense for feet and baskets. A student brings water, not to wash anything, only to cool the air and keep dust from waking. The archivist notes direction, faces a small harbour. He does not write the harbour's old name. He writes, opens to light. Across the bay a fisherman pauses to watch the flags on the team's little boat. He knows their colours now. He jokes that they are catching yesterday's streets. He pulls in his net and finds a small lead anchor, tangled among the mesh to perforations, a corner worn smooth, a tool that kept a boat honest. He taps it with a knuckle and nods. It sounds like something that worked. He sets it on the thwart and promises to return it to the people, who will let it dry without cracking. The divers rise in their own time and rest their hands on the gunwale before climbing aboard. They do not speak immediately. The rhythm up and the rhythm down do not want talking to overlap them. When they find words, they are practical. A line to shift, a plank likely, a cutwater piece not far beneath the square. The boatman marks their map with a pencil and draws the lamp in the corner the way the archivist does, not because a map needs a picture, but because the mind likes a friendly marker for here. In a white room away from wind and salt, the conservator reases a small piece into a bath, where the water is the temperature of a rested hand. Salt threads whisper out of pores. A pause is held, then the piece returns to air on a cradle that will not hurry it. Another piece rests under damp cloth. The room smells of patience. A clock ticks softly, not to command the work, but to keep the day from forgetting itself. Tradition remembers a ringed city. In the finds before us, we can say something smaller, but no less tender. People made straight lines where water wanted curves, and they did it with kind edges, bridges low enough to be crossed, quays high enough to keep feet dry, drains honest and simple. Records suggest their measures were ordinary, a span across a palm, a pace, a rope from elbow to fingertip. These are good numbers for sleep. They ask nothing fast from the ear. If you want one picture for your mind at rest, hold this. A bay seen from above as a sheet of glass with a faint writing underneath rectangles. A curve of stones where boats turned without fuss. A square that was once a room where someone learned by heart how to fold cloth. On the sand, a trowel lying still on felt in the water. A line that finds its way home. The lamp at the quay answers with its oval, telling the surface that the bottom is being treated kindly. Evening concedes the day without argument. The boat is tied with a length of new rope that keeps its lay. The lead line is rinsed and hung. The slate is wiped, but not erased until the notes live in the ledger. On shore, the trench rests under a breathable cover. The archivist labels trays with com words that never shout. North wall, doorway arc, floor tesserae pale. He adds a last small marker lamp to the edge of the day's plan and closes the book with both hands, like someone lowering a sleeping child into a cradle. The 10th part. Night work has its own daylight. Along a windward coast, towers keep a slow conversation in light. On the highest point, a keeper climbs a spiral with a tin of oil against his hip. He cleans the glass with linen that does not scratch, trims the wick until the flame stops wavering, then steps back to see whether the beam finds the water kindly. Far down the chain, another tower nods with its own pulse. Between them, captains read an old language that needs no alphabet. On, steady, safe. At the foot of the tower, stones speak of older jobs. Some carry the shallow scars of clamps that once held them in another wall. A mason taps a reused block and smiles at its firmness. He knows it slept in a harbour for centuries before holding this lighthouse hill. The foundation is a palimpsest of shoreline's keystones, temple steps, thresholds turned to face the wind. The light is new. The rock remembers many kinds of order. Our archivist stands in a small room with shelves that do not mind salt air. He opens a ledger where columns are simple and fair. Wicks issued, oil received, glass replaced, rope spliced. The numbers are not sharp. They are enough to keep the tower from surprises. In the margin he draws a lamp. Then, out of habit, a small wave. He writes a line any keeper would like. Wind constant, visibility generous. Tradition remembers stories of lights that could reach impossible distances or set ships aflame by mirrors. The tales make good winter talk. Records suggest something gentler and more useful. Steady wicks, polished metal that gathers and throws a consistent beam, lenses that calm a flame into a road. What travels far is not fire's heat, but its habit intervals, bearings, the courtesy of predictability. Past midnight, a watchman on a low point sets a brazier in a stone basket and feeds it with driftwood until the color is even. He shades the glow with a curved plate, so the light lies along the water rather than into the fields. A boy learning the work turns a small hourglass and notes the moment in chalk on a slate. He does not hurry his lines. He has been told that ships prefer clocks that keep the same personality in every tower along a coast. At dawn, a different crew tightens the last courses of a sea wall below the fortress that now guards the harbour mouth. The wall sits where an older light once stood. The masons leave a gentle batter leaning the face a little to teach waves to spend themselves politely. A carpenter caps the top with oiled wood so ropes can ride without fraying. They do not call this grandeur. They call it a good morning's work, and it will make 100 other mornings come. Language keeps a memory in its quiet way. In many tongues, the word for a beacon still carries the echo of a very old tower's name. People who never saw that first light say a version of it when they point to the modest one near their own harbour. A small inheritance like that helps at sea. You can ask for the light in a stranger's house and be understood. The map maker of our earlier night comes to the tower with a sheet under his arm. He asks the keeper for bearings taken in fair weather and in haze, the times when the beam is strongest, the colours of the lanterns used in the fishing cove to the east. He marks small rays on the chart, not because he wants to cover the paper with lines, but because a captain with sleep in his eyes will thank a diagram that remembers what he has sailed before. In the equipment room, the keeper shows the boy how to lay wicks to dry in loops, not knots, so they will not remember a kink. He points to a shelf where spare chimneys wait wrapped in linen, each marked with a soft charcoal circle to show which ones have never known soot. The boy nods as if listening to a story where nothing bad happens and all the tools find their places. He writes a single word on his slate ready and feels older. Records suggest that light is a public good that asks little and gives much. Ships come home, markets open on time, letters arrive with their wax intact. Traditions grow around it, a basket of bread left for the night watch, a shawl set by the stair for cold hours, a bell struck once at the turning of the wick. None of this is dramatic. All of it is a city's way of saying that mornings matter. If you want a single picture to rest with, let it be this: a tower on a headland, glass clean, flame steady, the beam lying along a calm sea below, a curve of new stone that teaches waves to behave far away, a second light answering with an even blink. The lamp at the quay keeps its oval on the harbour's skin, a small echo of the larger beam. Between the small and the large, ships move like quiet sentences, each finding its period at a familiar shore. The 11th part. Morning opens gently over a long arcade where stalls are already arranged like careful sentences. A cloth awning lifts and settles, making a low breath of shade. The first customers speak in short phrases that fit easily into the hour. How much? How fresh? Which beam is honest? A baker arrives with loaves that learn their shape in a clay mouth all night. He taps the bottom of one with 2 fingers and listens for the small hollow that means the crumb will be kind. At the end of the row, a woman sets a balance on a low table and wipes its pans with a square of linen. She lays out her weights as if greeting old friends. A stone with a clipped corner, a bronze disc with a faint ring of green, a little bag filled with fine shot for trimming a measure without pride. A beer smiles and places a handful of grain in the left pan, then watches the right pan rise, then settle, and finally agree. The transaction makes a soft sound like 2 cups touching. Our archivist keeps a book for this market, not to scold anyone, only to remember what keeps mornings smooth. He notes the hour the gate opened, the wine's mood, the first loaf sold for a fair coin, the jar of oil that left for a temple's lamp. He draws a tiny seal beside the line, that mentions the city's set of standard weights, kept in a chest near the fountain. Bring them out every market day. The margin says in his neat hand, let the scales remember themselves. Tradition remembers that great cities praised order with tall speech. Records suggest that the quiet truth of order lives here. In scales that do not rush, in measures that do not bully, in sellers who name the weight first and the price second. A boy practicing numbers counts beans into a bowl by fours, and his mother nods when his hand keeps a steady rhythm. A miller lifts his cap to the woman with the balance and grins at her habit of testing his sack's trust, does not complain when it is weighed. Along the arcade, a scribe for hire sits with a small board on his knees and writes a receipt for a fisherman who cannot spare the time to learn letters today. The scribe speaks each word aloud as he writes, so the agreement lives in sound as well as ink. He folds the note, presses a seal with a simple device to circles and a dot and hands it over with a smile that has nothing to sell in it. Across from him, a potter chalks prices on the rim of a tray, then wipes them and writes them again a touch smaller, pleased by the neatness. A quiet inspector, no badge, no flourish, walks the line of stalls with a set of travelling weights wrapped in cloth. He tests a scale here, another there, and says little besides good and the hair high. When one pan drifts, he shows the owner a grain of grit under the pivot, flicks it away, and the beam finds level like a mind that has just remembered a simple truth. The owner thanks him with a piece of bread and a date. The exchange takes less time than a quarrel and prevents 20 of them. At the fountain, water falls in a thread into a shallow trough where clay cups stand like little boats. People drink with their elbows on stone and trade small news. A new baby on the hill, a fairy that leaves later on even days, a set of rings planted in the quay so goats can be tied in the shade. A gardener tips a jar into a bucket slowly. The handle will not squeak if he is patient. The bucket goes on a bar, and two people carry it away, neither more burdened than the other. Just inside the gate, a cart maker sets a freshly turned wheel upright and watches it spin without wobble. He holds a reed close to the rim and listens for the even whisper. Then he sets the wheel aside to learn its roundness in stillness as well as in motion. His apprentice brings the axle pegs a hair nearly twins and the master weighs them in his hand as if they were fruit. He chooses the one that feels honest and sets the other to season longer. Not everything is ready when you want it. Markets are patient teachers. Our archivist copies a page called Customs of Fairness into the front of his book. Open the gate at the same hour each market day, keep the shade even across the stalls, test the measures before noon, pour water for any traveller who asks without coin, make the first sale to the first person who arrived, not the loudest who calls. He closes the book, then opens it again to add one more line. Lend your lamp to the stall whose wick failed, the light will return itself. If you like a single image to carry with you, let it be a balance beam at rest, the pointer straight, the pans calm, the smallest weight placed with 2 fingers. Around it, hands that know their work, faces that prefer agreement to cleverness, the smell of bread that will be eaten with olives in the shade. Over in the corner, the lamp at the market gate keeps its oval of light for early arrivals and late packers. It does not choose sides. It makes fairness easier to see. By midday, the arcade is a little louder, but not sharp. A drummer passes, not to sell anything, only to keep the pace of feet regular along the outer walk. The inspector finishes his round and ties his weights back into their cloth. The boy who counted beans takes his coin and runs to buy a small coil of cord. He will practice neat knots until the evening. The baker smiles at an empty basket. He leaves a heel of bread by the fountain for the first person who has had a thin morning. This is how cities teach themselves to be kind, without speeches. The 12th part. The year moves like a slow boat along a familiar coast. In a small courtyard, a timekeeper draws a thin line of chalk from the base of a gnomon to a mark he made last season. The mark sits in shade for most of the morning and then, at a certain week, receives the sun like a letter addressed by habit. He does not count loudly. He watches a shadow touch a carved notch and nods to himself as if someone he trusts had arrived on time. By the river, a staircase descends into coolness where water talks more softly than wind. On one step, a mason has cut small numbers that are more comfort than command. A woman in a plain wrap kneels, dips a stick, and lifts it to see where the dark line stops. She smiles, high enough to feed the fields, not so high as to trouble the key. A boy repeats the measure and tries to match her comb. The measure will become a market price without anyone raising a voice. In an upper room with a steady draft, a maker of clepsydras sets a copper bowl onto still water. The bowl has a barely visible hole near the rim. The drop begins and the day learns its pace. On a shelf, 5 other bowls wait with faint scratches that remember seasons, the longer evenings of late spring, the slow afternoons after harvest. He breathes on a glass and wipes a soot mark from a wick, not because the lamp minds, but because a clear lamp is a kind neighbor to a clock. Tradition remembers cities that praise themselves for knowing the sky. Records suggest the sky answered most kindly when people ask small, regular questions: where the sunrise will sit in a week, when the tide will turn this year, how long water takes to empty from a bowl that has never lied. In a lane near the harbor, someone has cut a line into the stone with a tiny cross where the solstice shadow rests for a breath, and then goes on. People step over it as they carry baskets. A few look down and feel steadier for it. Our archivist keeps a thin folio titled "The Years Seen by Hands." Inside are drawings no grander than a child's, a stair with marks, a pole in a yard, a boat's rope laid out in loops that match the moons. He writes a sentence in the margin. Numbers grow gentle when tied to places. Then he draws our small lamp near the river stair. He likes the thought that a lamp and a mark together can make a night safe for a fisherman and a morning fair for a baker. Out on the mole, a keeper walks with a board that has 12 shallow grooves. In each groove sits a small stone, and each stone has a notch. On market days, he slides one stone forward. When the bell in the tower sounds on festival eves, he sets all 12 back and smiles at the clean look of beginnings. A sailor asks him what the board is called. "Company," he says, and the sailor laughs at the good answer. At dusk, a reader on the roof watches the first star he trusts for bearings appear above the eastern wall. He lifts a string with 2 knots and aligns them with the star and a corner of the lighthouse. When they agree, he closes a book that is mostly blank and writes a single line. Now, he will tell a pilot who prefers sky to bells. The pilot will nod and say the word in a way that means both time and direction. In an orchard just inland, a gardener ties a ribbon to the branch of a fig and marks on the trunk the day when shade reaches a certain stone. When the ribbon has faded twice, he will prune. When the stone stays bright at noon for a whole week, he will open the channel a finger more and let water walk a bit faster. He tells an apprentice why seedlings read light more gently than books do. The apprentice sets a pot where gloss becomes matte and thinks of nothing urgent for a full minute. The staircase by the river records a season quietly. At first the steps are dry to the 5th notch, then to the 7th. A child scratches a line with a stick and calls it hers. The woman with the measuring rod does not scold. She adds a second, straighter line beside it and names both aloud, "wish" and "is." The child repeats both words and laughs. On the quay, the price of bread stays the same. People say the city is lucky. The city says the stair is honest. Our map maker visits the timekeeper in the courtyard and runs a finger along the chalk. He asks when the shadow will touch the 2nd mark this year and receives an answer without numbers, only a phrase about the festival at the river. He writes that phrase on a chart near the drawing of the harbour captains. From far places read it and find comfort in a word that sounds like a door opening. Records suggest that calendars are kinder when carried in more than one pocket. A bell for those who like sound, a line for those who trust light, a bowl for those who keep night watch, a stair for those who sell bread. Tradition remembers kings who set the year by decree. The market remembers grandmothers who set it by shade. Both can be true, one is softer on the ear. If you want a single image to carry towards sleep, hold this: a courtyard with a no one, whose shadow kisses a quiet mark, a river stair with shallow numbers, and a woman's calm hand, a copper ball releasing a drop, that you can almost hear a lamp set near all three, not to announce, only to make the edges kind. The year, like the sea, keeps the thoughts at once rise and fall, light and rest stand in between them. People arrange their days so mornings have fewer surprises. When evening comes, the timekeeper wipes the old chalk with the side of his hand and redraws the line thinner. The stair grows quiet in blue light, the numbers take on the color of wet stone. The clepsydra's bowl rests upside down on a cloth, drying as gently as a leaf. Our archivist closes the folio and slips a narrow strip of ribbon between pages. He writes on the spine, "Measure, kindly." Then he sets the lamp where it can be found in the dark with one reach. The 13th part. Home is a set of habits that remember us when we are tired. In a narrow lane, a doorway keeps its small lamp where it always does. The flame is not a signal, it is a promise that edges will be kind. A child ties a cord to a peg near the threshold and practices a loop until the hand knows it without thinking. Across the way, an older neighbor nods at the neatness and says nothing more than good. The word lands like a blanket. In a kitchen that smells of warm clay and clean water, a pot rests in a hollow lined with smooth pebbles. The pebbles hold cool from the night, the pot shares it with the day. Someone learned this trick from a traveler who learned it from a harbor where jars slept in cellars cut into rock. The knowledge has no banner. It passes like shade across a courtyard, ordinary and welcome. Our archivist sits at a low table and sorts the thin folders he has kept 4 decades. He reads one line on each spine rings: kind markets, fair light, steady year, gentle and, smiles at how the words refuse to compete. He chooses a younger pair of hands and places the folders in them one by one. Open in winter, he suggests for the one about beacons. Open on festival eves, for the one about measures. He does not give speeches. He points to lamps, doors, stairs, and quiet tools, as if the city were a body that stays well by sleeping on time. A carpenter shows an apprentice how to lay a curve without forcing it. He springs a thin batten against small nails and watches it choose its own path. Believe the wood, he says, and it will be kind to the boat. The apprentice traces the line with a pencil the color of walnut and lifts the batten away. The curve remains even and calm, like a shoreline that has found how to greet the tide without quarrel. Tradition remembers the big Talon island with rings, a pride that ripened too far, a night and a day of water. We let that remain a distant headland. Records suggest other endings, all of them quiet. Canals cleared in autumn, steps cut, where the river rises, bridges made low and strong, markets opened at 1 hour for everyone. Nothing here asks the ear to wake sharply. It is an alphabet of courtesies, and anyone can read it with the hands. At a school near the harbour, a reader writes 2 words on a slate: wish and is. He draws a small circle around the first and a small square around the second, then sets a tiny bridge between them. The class laughs softly at the picture because it looks like a toy harbour. We live between these every day, he says. Sometimes the circle teaches, sometimes the square does. We keep them in company. He wipes the slate with his palm and leaves a faint ghost that pleases him. Down on the quay, the lamp keeps its oval on the water. A merchant ties his packets with dyed wool and marks them not with long claims, but with small drawings. A ring for a garden city, a line of dots for a market's fair weights, a star for a tower that reads the night. The symbols travel well, language catches up later. A ferryman who has never read the dialogues knows exactly which bundle goes to the lighthouse hill. In a garden just inside the wall, a woman edges a bed with reeds cut to one length. She lays a thin channel along the inner rim and opens a clay valve with 2 fingers. The water walks with dignity, the soil darkens to a comfortable color. A neighbor pauses at the gate and watches for a minute that contains no announcements and no prices, only the agreement of gravity and habit. Your curves are patient, he says. The reeds taught me, she answers, and they both smile at the truth of it. Our map maker, older now, brings a chart to the quay and rests it on a crate. It is more water than land, more breath than ink. In the corner, the lamp emblem keeps its small place as it always has. He shows a young captain how a straight line is an intention, and a curve is the sea answering kindly. He puts a fingertip on the wind rose and says, "You'll travel farther by giving in a little." The captain nods like someone being told a family story he already knows. A bell rings once from the hill where the watch keeps late hours. It is not a warning, it is the turn of the wick. Children count out loud because they enjoy being part of something that will be there whether they count or not. A baker opens his door a touch because the oven gives a pleasant heat to the lane. Someone leaves half a loaf by the fountain for anyone who had a thin morning. Elsewhere that would be a story, here it is a routine that keeps pride asleep. If you want one image to rest with, hold this: a small lamp by a door. Steady a coil of cord that lies flat and obedient, a chalk mark on stone where the shadow will kiss at solstice, a ring of garden with a low bridge, a ledger open to a page where names sit with space around them so they can breathe. The mind does not have to choose whether the island once stood or only stands on paper. It can live here, at the scale of hands and mornings, where the lesson never raises its voice. Evening takes the day, the way a harbour takes a tide without argument. The archivist places a folded cloth over the folders and sets a pebble on top, so the air will not turn the pages. The carpenter hangs the baton onto nails, where it keeps its memory for tomorrow. The reader closes the door of the small school and leaves the faint ghost of wish, and is on the slate for the morning light to find. Down at the quay, the lamp keeps doing the only thing it knows, making edges kind. The 14th part. Night returns without needing to announce itself. The harbour breathes a long, even breath. The lamp at the quay answers with its oval on the water. A small boat lingers just beyond the posts, choosing when to push off. In the window above the lane, a reader closes a book and sets it so the spine rests easy. The room keeps a thin warmth from the lamp, the street keeps a coolness from the sea. Between them the city finds the temperature where sleep begins. Our archivist stands by the door for a moment longer than he needs to. He has locked the cupboard where the folders live, rings, markets, lights, and the key sits quiet in his palm. He turns it once, not to question himself, only to enjoy the neat feel of a job completed without spectacle. On the nearest page, he has drawn the small lamp one last time, as if to remind the paper how to be kind. Then he blows gently on the ink until it fades from gloss to matte, and the day agrees to close. Out on the mole, the keeper shades the glass and checks the wick's trimmed edge. The beam lays along the water like a polite path. It touches a buoy that rocks only a little and glances off a white stone that once was part of another wall. The keeper's book says oil sufficient, wind steady, visibility generous. He writes those words every time they are true, because truth that repeats is the kind that helps strangers get home. The map maker rolls a chart and ties it with dyed wool, leaving a finger's width so the knot will unlearn itself without a fight. He has added a note in the corner where the lamp emblem sits: return here when lost. It is not a command, only a habit of mind. The chart will lie in a chest padded with linen. The chest will ride under a bench where steps will warm it at night. A captain will open it in the morning and see the water as intention and answer, straight lines and courtesy curves. A market stall stands empty now except for a balance at rest. One pan holds a small weight like a moon on a string, the other holds nothing at all and remains level. The woman who owns it has covered the table with cloth and tucked the weights into their wrap. Tomorrow she will unfold them in the same order and greet them by touch. Fairness sleeps standing up, like a boat at her moorings. In the courtyard, a chalk line waits for the shadow it knows well. The no one stands like a quiet reed. The bowl that kept time now dries upside down on a folded cloth. A fig leaf rests on the step where the child scratched wish beside it. The mother's straighter line holds its place with modest pride. The river below mutters a gentle truth to the stone: rise and fall, fall and rise. The stair remembers both without opinion. The city is smaller at night in the best way. Streets shorten to fit footsteps. Doors become faces. A single lamp can represent a quarter, a craft, a year's memory. People pass without hurry and nod at the familiar circles of light that sit where corners used to feel sharp. A ferryman carries 3 parcels tied with coloured wool ring, dots, star and nose which hill each belongs to, without asking anyone to speak. If you want one last image to keep, let it be this: a shore traced in patience, a lamp by a door, a bridge that does not lift its back to high, a ledger with space around the names, a chart that is more water than land. The old tale about a great ring in the sea can stay where it belongs on a shelf within reach, a headland on the horizon of thought. What matters here is the habit it praised when it was calm. Make edges kind, measure without pride. Let light be steady, let mornings be fair. The boat pushes off at last. Its oars begin as whispers and settle into a slow rhyme. The beam touches the oarlocks and then moves on. At the quay, the lamp continues to make its modest oval, repeatedly, reliably, like a polite sentence that ends where it should. The archivist sets the key on a nail and turns down his own lamp until the flame is a bead. The city, satisfied with its small agreements, lies down.